Hi folks, today we will be sitting down with Christine Payne-Towler, who is the founder of Tarot University, established to promote the understanding and study of Tarot as a useful astro-alphanumeric document with relevance in the 21st century. Utilizing her scholarship in historical tarot, she designed the layouts and wrote the interpretive text for the automated online tarot reading program at the populartarot.com website, offering an online tarot alternative for people strong with tools for personal insight near at hand. She has written and extensively on the history of tarot with an emphasis on historical context. Her essays, videos, and lecture recordings of the past 20 years are currently being transcribed and published online since 2005 via the Tarot Arc Letters, a publication of Tarot University designed for students of the Tarot. Christine is a proponent of the Continental Tarot system. Christine's latest work is the deck Tarot of the Holy Light, created with Michael Dowers, voted one of the 10 best decks of 2011. Christine also has an app for her iPhone and Android, which I highly recommend. Details are on her website in the left-hand bar at the top on the homepage. You can learn more about Christine and her work at Facebook. Search for her by name, Christine Payne-Towler, or search for Tarot of the Holy Light, or search for Tarot Arc Letters. You can also visit her website, tarotarcletters.com. That is www.tarotarcletters.com. Christine is also available for private consultation. Christine, are you there?
Yes, I am, Mihir. Thank you very much for that introduction. It's very exciting to be here today. I have a lot to share. I'm looking forward to exposing you to topics that have occupied my thinking for most of my adult life. It has taken quite a long time to gather up these shreds and crumbs, so I celebrate the opportunity to lay it out before you now in a more total form. Today we're going to be talking about astro theology, and I want to give full credit to author Susan Joy Renison for introducing me to this term. Astro theology is the spirituality of the cosmic clock, which is what we're looking at here, a lovely, beautiful pocket watch with the whole universe mapped on its face. This is the knowledge that comes to us from the ancient henge builders, ziggurat builders, temple builders, all the observatory builders of antiquity. They learned very closely the habits of the heavens and learned to construct not only monuments but working observatories in which to continue to enrich their knowledge of the cosmic clock and leave behind evidence of our own place in this larger expanded universe of thought. So let's look for a second at the face of this clock and think about what it's showing us. We're used to the 12-hour clock, which doubles over the course of a day. This shows those hours as being the signs of the zodiac. The signs are actually small clusters of stars that appear in the heavens together along our lines of sight as we look out along the Milky Way. So they represent little nodes or knots of significance, which we see in the rolling of the sky as it goes by us through the night. And many stories, many ancient legends are tied to the characters that we have embroidered into the Milky Way, or maybe I should say that we have found in the Milky Way. So when I thought of the subtitle, The Thin Spindle of Necessity, it is to draw your thinking along this Milky Way path and show you the monuments, the literal psychological and spiritual monuments that have been placed in the sky as a part of our experience as humans. We live under these meaningful sections of time, literally time-space, which as it unfolds around us sets the rhythm and sets the pace for our human life here on Earth. So you see these hours set up to be the signs, the regions of the Milky Way. The little red lines each represent 2 degrees of in a 360-degree wheel, because of course it's terrifically compressed here to get it down onto a clock face. You can't see every single degree. You see also basically what will be the mark, that circle on the face, the slightly irregular non-centric circle on the face of the star field is what's going to be the Milky Way, the plane of the ecliptic from which we draw these signs. So this clock then allows us to see ourselves not so much standing on the sun in the middle of the solar system, but standing on the Earth looking out at the solar system and seeing all of the deep space phenomena against which we experience our own reality. Slide 2. Here's the Greek image of the thin spindle of necessity. I often think back to the Greek philosophers because they defined so much of our reality now with their deep thinking from antiquity. The apple is a generous fruit. It feeds many animals. It makes many copies of itself every year. And it makes sure that in the course of taking care of the rest of nature, it will be taken care of too. Notice, however, those seeds will sprout away from the fruit. The fruit is not absolutely necessary for the establishment of a tree. I can nibble every bit away from this apple and throw the core off into oblivion and never think twice, and accidentally still be starting a whole forest of apple trees, because it only takes the core to start a new tree. Yes, the tree provides for itself generously, but even without the flesh, this fruit is powerful. This fruit, even used up, even dried out, even kicked into the dirt and ignored, this thin spindle of necessity at the center of the apple carries the essence into the future. So this is the metaphor I'm using for our astro theology and our ancient astrological teachings that we're going to be talking about today. This is the dried up, thrown aside, ignored and forgotten leftovers, the refuse, the non-glamorous structural beams of astrological thought. And by blasting away or chewing away or rotting away all the unnecessary extra outer layers, we now have in our hands the thin spindle of necessity. From these few ideas, all of the world's astrologies have grown. So to do this work, it's been necessary to separate all of the different astrologies from the one single science that everybody's practicing at the foundation. We're separating the preferences from the necessities so that we can find the seeds, because where you have the seeds, you have the gist. Slide 3. There is an unbroken thread, an underground stream that connects astrology, religion, science, magic, and the culture that extends from antiquity to the present. This stream goes back as far as we can identify ourselves as a literary animal. The roots of our written traditions rest here. If there is a perennial tradition maintained by a lineage of intellectual forefathers, this is it. So, we're making a presentation of the core cosmic model carried forward from antiquity. Now, I made an emphasis on the idea of the literary animal because prior to astrology, we were living in a mythopoetic universe of the spoken song and story. Things were carried down by memory. There wasn't writing and calculating for us to, check our facts against. The shamans carried the remembrance of the people, and they were the ones who kept track of the moon phases and the weather and the cyclical process so that we could have a calendar of sorts. But once we acquired the numbers and letters, we have the tools for calculating our fate here beneath the stars. It wasn't that we lacked astronomical awareness before, we lacked the tools for making it up into a full science as we have been doing since we came upon this more sophisticated way of thinking. So there's a two-way flow that has been happening ever since we learned to map the cosmos. So we watch the cosmos speaks to us. We get better at hearing that speech, the speech of the planets moving through the cosmic clock, and that increases our sophistication and our mathematical ability. Then we can probe more deeply and the heavens can show us more. So from my understanding of the growth of human appreciation, the first priesthoods were clearly dedicated to learning the math, learning the science, observing the heavens as a full-time occupation, recording and comparing and scientifically breaking down what they learned from watching and keeping track. So astrology and astronomy are the tutor of humanity. We would not have literary culture, we would not have science, we wouldn't be capable of our amazing feats today if we had not become astronomers very, very long time ago. This was what moved us from living day to day, just one season at a time, to finally seeing ourselves coming and going in time, being able to go forwards and backwards in time, being able to spread out in the cosmos and move around. This is what it took for us to become the calculating creature that we are today. Slide 4. We're going to talk about creation myths for a minute because this is where we can listen in on our ancestors talking about how we got here, how we became. Every creation myth has to solve the problem of making something from nothing. This is exactly what the physicists are up against. How did an apparent void produce all this reality? Where did it come from? So we pretty much every civilization that has left us myths has started with the principles of number, literally the single digits from 0 to 9, or what we say now from 1 to 10. These single digits carry us through the necessary mental stages required to visualize the unfolding of the world. So it's already been established by scientists, and certainly anybody who lives with animals can see it. Animals can count. They count visually up to 4. And they can see multiples of groups of 4, just the same way that our zodiac is 3 times 4. So we could take ourselves a certain way along this path just by playing around with pebbles on the ground, making shapes and adding things in. But how did we learn to calculate? How did we learn to rationate, to really begin notating and stacking up these smaller numeric ideas and building them out into a larger system? This is a question that has occupied me forever, and I can't tell you whether I have an answer or not. There are plenty of theories. I read theorists all the time attempting to explain how our brains and how our cultures came across it. So you may have your own theories. Who gave us the number sequence? Who gave us the shape of the thinking that allowed us to shift over from natural numbers to synthetic numbers of the type that we now calculate with. But it was already true by the time of Alexander that when he conquered his 17 or 19 nations and poured them all together and forced them all to translate their mystery documents into the Koine Greek, when they all compared notes, they found they were all doing the same thing. They were all using the same number theology. They were all using the same astronomical and astrological assumptions. Even their god names, even though they were so different from one language to another, referred to the very same planets. So this was the point when everybody looked at each other and said, my gosh, it's all one thing. Everybody thought they had their own special mysteries and nobody else had them, when actually what they each had were different translations of the same astrological worldview. So again, somewhere along the line, we went from a natural grasp of number to a synthetic grasp of number. And with that came the ability to calculate, the ability to notate, the ability to build up a body of teachings much more sophisticated than what our Aboriginal predecessors could present. Now, I'm not saying our Aboriginal predecessors did not know things. They knew perhaps much more than we will ever give them credit for. I'm saying their ability to notate what they knew was more limited. Their ability to register it in writing, to calculate with numbers. I'm really trying to make this distinction here because humanity as a literate animal lives in a different world than humanity as immersed in nature. Humanity as immersed in nature has direct apprehension of everything and doesn't need to calculate, doesn't need encyclopedias. It's all awake to the body. The body itself becomes the calculation tool, becomes the container for these mysteries. But as we fell away from that immersion mystery, something intervened in our consciousness and we began to live one step removed from that immersion. And at that point, we developed writing and we developed numbers. We developed these tools so that we could codify and talk about what we used to be completely present for. Now we have to stand back from it, take measurements on it, and stack up the information, and then, lay it down in paper or some other medium in order to learn it back to ourselves. We've lost something that the Aborigines had, but what we gained in exchange was the ability to write and calculate and begin to be objective about our reality. So I started here talking about the creation myths only to say you have to encounter numbers and build a number system before you can go forth into something as sophisticated as astrology. So the process of how 1 becomes 2 and 2 becomes 3 and 3 becomes 4, this is the very first basis that all creation myths are laid upon. Slide 5. So let's look at this idea of creation for a second. Just contemplate what it is we're talking about when we use this idea. Physicists will tell you that matter is organized by frequencies, and the higher frequencies, the finer frequencies actually govern the denser, slower, lower frequencies. So you follow that frequency chain up, you eventually arrive at the giant brain of the cosmos, the macro organizing principle that emanates all the frequencies that organize all of matter. So the question is, what is that giant brain? Who or what holds all of this in place? what are the forces that support manifestation? Every different people has to ask this question and has to find some level of answers, or they can't claim themselves to be an organized culture, right? We are organized in the name of whatever we consider to be the creator. And with an understanding or some mythos around a creator, then we can create ourselves in that image. So many have said the gods exist to give us a mirror on ourselves. And I might add into that the idea that the heavens exist. We've constellated or organized the heavens in order to give us an image of ourselves. Writ large, macrocosmically expressed. So this is where our ancient ancestors of the astronomical priesthoods were working. They were looking up and out to see the anatomy of God, and then they were bringing the ideas down and in to shape the consciousness and creativity of humanity. So this is literally the way in which we are, quote unquote, made in the image of God. And all the creation myths lead to this idea. They lead through the unfolding of the numbers into a world just like what we find now, where we are fitted in the microcosm to resonate with the energies raining down on us from the macrocosm. So where nowadays we call this space weather, and we're learning about it in new ways, our ancient ancestors have from the beginning understood ourselves to be open to the heavens and receiving continuous information and intelligence coming down from above. And as we watch what the heavenly energies are doing, we can conform ourselves to those energies bit by bit as they happen. Slide 6. So the teachings associated with early astrology and our first organizing understanding of the heavens, these teachings are attributed to Sophia, who is from ancient times understood to be the spouse or consort of God, literally of Jehovah. When you translate this from the Semitic languages into the Greek and Roman, it translates as wisdom or logos. And Sophia itself, the word Sophia in the Semitic root languages, is actually a contraction of Ophis, which is the serpent or the serpent path. Basically, all astronomical rotations were experienced as the fluctuations of the serpent of time. So Sophia then is the personification of astronomical wisdom, the wisdom of astronomical calculations, astronomical judgments, the wisdom of our understanding of ourself as a creature in time, the wisdom of a life lived in relation to these cosmic pulses. So the Sophianic or wisdom literature, which has come through all the ancient civilizations from the Middle East, is a collection of teachings and resources that support literacy and numeracy in the ancient world. Practically considered, this is a collection of essays about what works, what is real, what can be trusted to assist the struggling human in a capricious and unstable world. Included in these wisdom teachings, this Sophianic canon, are the arts of astrology, sacred geometry, alchemy, and the core premises of the Kabbalistic speculation. These are all divisions of the wisdom tradition based on fundamental number theory, the appearances of the layers of reality through the stages of 1, 2, 3, 4, and all the geometry and all the reality affect that emerges from each of these stations. So a person who wanted to be wise in ancient ways could not forego these teachings. This wisdom tradition was all over the ancient world, and this is what was being taught in all the initiatory centers. Different emphasis in different cultures, of course. Each culture developed their own vocabulary. But we can look back to some of our oldest astronomical writings, which would be the Tetrabiblos and the Almagest from Ptolemy, and also the Sefer Yetzirah from the Hebrew canon. These ancient documents that were solidified right around the time of Christ, written down and made public, made more available. They contain everything that I'm going to be talking about today. Everything that I'm going to be sharing is all boiled down into this core astronomical and astrological canon of techniques and skills, which an initiate of any tradition would have to learn. So, this is not some foggy, nebulous, loose set of theories. When I say things like astrology, sacred geometry, alchemy, Kabbalah, these are interlocking sciences that take the astronomical facts and carry them over into, for example, the conformation of the human body. There's a whole medicine called alchemy that's based on the implicits of the wisdom tradition. There's also, of course, the sacred geometry that spreads out into masonry and all of this henge building and cathedral building that I was talking about earlier, that allows us to make observatories and make sacred spaces that are tuned to these specific astronomical frequencies and that will register these events in the heavens, bring them down into the human sphere where humans can participate. So again, all of our ancient arts and sciences pour out of cosmic wisdom, just like the colors break out of white light. And everything that we have learned and accumulated and all these different arts and sciences that interlock with each other are based in this astrology, which was all present at the turn into our current millennium. So as we're looking at this, try and ponder this mystery. How did our ancestors learn this? Okay, number 7. Every culture has its own creation myths. The Hebrews call it the Tzimtzum. The Greeks have the Lambdoma. The Gnostics have their progression of the Syzygies. All these different creation myths use the basic outline of the numbers to explain how the many emerge from the one. This is the essence of number mysticism. Each number represents its own stage of manifestation. This is necessary to elaborate because the first question always is, how did this incredibly varied creation emerge out of the one? How did we go from the one to the many? So this means that in terms of human thinking, the original archetypes are the numbers. The numbers are literally the tools with which creation was affected. And I'm not just talking theoretically here, because as I mentioned earlier, when you break white light out into its frequencies, you see the rainbow. These are very specific frequencies that at their peak of perfection register in our consciousness, in our sensory apparatus, as different colors. Same with the sound spectrum. The sound spectrum is broken by repeating nodes within the note that break out into harmonics, which are exactly related to the root note the same way the colors are related to white light. This is a design feature in reality as we experience it, that certain frequencies are carried or embedded inside of others, and when we get these numbers and these ratios correct, we can break into the mystery of creation and see the component parts. So this is exquisitely sophisticated thinking on the part of people that we consider to have been aborigines. So when I'm talking about the creation myths as number sequences, I'm saying our ancestors were directly perceiving how the core elements of life open out into the myriad frequencies that create the sensory experience which we have. It's not just mythopoetic, this is scientific. Slide 8. So we're looking here at this wonderful circular staircase because it gives us a visualization of what our ancestors were trying to think their way through when they were studying the heavens and when they were trying to understand the unfolding of numbers. You can see physically here, a cycle is a series of circles that advance along an axis to unfold across both space and time. When ancient creation myths are told, when the number process is elaborated and explained, this is the mind going through these circular reawakenings to the same thing at higher and higher levels. As we bring our thoughts along this line of progression from 1 to the 2 to the 3 to the 4, we are tutoring ourselves to rationate and turn back upon ourselves with higher and higher octaves of understanding. And that's literally what's going on as these ancient myths come forward in time and start accumulating greater and greater acuity. Now, I want to make sure that I haven't dropped anything as we're staring at this, because I'm really speaking to you at multiple levels at once. So just setting aside our current understanding of number for a minute, let's just realize a few things about the mythic or ancient worldview. When you start with 1, and I am telling you, our ancestors started with the positive number 1, not the negative number 0. They did not get to theology with 0 until very close to the modern time. So please set aside whatever cliches you might have in your mind about the idea that counting starts with 0. It does not. The abacus starts with 1. The number sequence starts with 1. Our ancient astro theologians started on the positive side with a universe that already exists. They understood 0. This was why they created their mythic cycles to start from the unground, so to speak, from the pre-Big Bang moment. But our experience begins with the positive number 1, and this would be called the monad. You could consider the monad to be the everything that we talked about earlier, the biggest mind, the macro set, the container that holds everything else that we can experience and everything that we can't experience as well. So when I use the word monad, I am talking about the all. And this is the place where all the ancestors began their understanding of reality and creation. And this is where we will start as well. So from the monad, in order to make any steps in any direction, you have to divide that whole. You have to divide the 1. So as soon as the concept of 2 emerges, then the 1 splits in half, like a cell dividing. When the concept of 3 emerges, the 1 splits into 3. These numbers are not additive when you're thinking in the ancient mode. These numbers are divisive. The bigger the number, the smaller the fraction. This is what you can see in this slide, looking straight up this circular staircase. The more stairs you add, the more fractions you divide that tower into, the more, the smaller each fraction becomes in relation to the whole. So when you hear any of these creation myths and they say, okay, from the one came the two, from the two came the three, they're not talking about there are more things, more ones being added. They're not talking about something like what we do when we put money in our bank account or when we stack pickup sticks. We're talking about divisions of the whole into constituent parts. And with each number, you divide the whole into a different number of constituent parts. And by doing that, you actually see into a different dimension of the whole. So these numbers represent like lenses or filters over the one. The one never disappears. It's never gone. It doesn't get buried under the other numbers, and it doesn't get smaller as the other numbers get bigger. The one includes all the other numbers, and the bigger a number is, the smaller quotient of reality it actually can qualify. This is just so important to grok, and it means we have to look into the telescope of number from the other direction. We literally have to experience numbers differently than we do now. Slide 9. So, all creation myths establish this worldview that the numbers are emanated from what we're calling here the void, or what the scientists call the Big Bang. All the positive suchness, the literal mass and matter, emerges from that fertile aperture. In the ancient days, it was considered more feminine than masculine. And upon what emanates from that creative source is hung the manifested and visible cosmos. And remember what I told you about Sophia being inside the mind of God. She is the consort of God. She is the companion of God. She is the keeper of all the wisdom. But she lives inside the creator. And so no wonder the zero is considered this pregnant, super excitable, impossible to understand volcano of fertility, like a white hole compared to what we think of as a black hole, because it is the androgynous nexus, the all one together of all polarization. So it's really not a zero at all, right? It's really not a void at all. It's a super plentiful, larger than everything we can imagine, ceaseless cauldron of reality creation, out of which our meager little limited cosmos is formed. So again, we are not going to be indulging in the modern nihilistic worship of the zero. There is no zero in ancient cosmogonic speculation. That's anti-life and anti-theology. So I'll just leave it at that. Anyway, in terms of creation myths, 1 is the monad, 2 is the act of division, 3 is the place where creation actually happens, in the cleft, in the split line between 1 and 2, where 1 breaks itself into 2, right at that center point is the place from which 3 emerges. So this is our expanding universe theory right here. As soon as the monad decides, let there be anything, let there be something, let there be some change, then it goes into this act of division. And when it starts dividing, from the potential of that very first division emerges all the rest of the creation, because 2 then polarizes, and from the oppositeness that results, now you all of a sudden have yin and yang. From the creative spark that arcs between them comes the middle term. And from that middle term comes a whole new reality, which then polarizes itself and bursts forth another new reality, which then polarizes again and bursts forth another new reality. So as soon as one becomes two, in that fertile gap between those sudden opposites, we have an infinite number of possible new manifestations, which will continue to emerge. So this thinking, the one becomes two, becomes three, which becomes everything, is called by the Greeks as the tetractys, and it's the basis of their number theology. Slide 10. This is a graph of everything I've said up to this point, and I made this graph for my first book and connected it to the first 10 trumps of the tarot. But what I wanted you to look at is simply that the line that's labeled geometry, where you can actually see the one becomes two, becomes three, becomes four, and each number divides the monad into a different set of facets. And from that different set of facets comes an entirely different geometry. And from that geometry comes an entirely different set of manifestations in the world. So this is how the Greeks would teach divine qualities. They would teach the divine character and its manifestations is through these simple geometric explanations of how nature unfolds under the numbers. Slide 11. Here's the more sophisticated arrangement of these things. Now you see them stacked in the way the Greeks would teach them. And they would use this in the very, very simple form where you just see this pyramid made up of dots, or it could be used in more elaborate forms. This one here is synthetic. I put it together 15 years ago just so that I could see that geometry stacked in tetractys fashion. But it's been, the tetractys as a teaching diagram has been used by not only the Greeks, but the Kabbalists and the Pythagoreans and many others who love the pure and simple reasonableness of it. So I've kind of decorated it with these geometric images, but it's here just to show you this magical and geometric revelation. Another thing that is built into this tetractys, which we don't see here because I've cut it off at the point of 10, is that, of course, the thing continues outwards. There's another row of 5 points. The row after that has 6 points, etc. So when you continue adding these rows, 2 more rows taken down to where you have 6 points at the bottom adds up to 21, which lines right up with the tarot trumps. This is the reason why so many teachers say there are 21 trumps and the Fool, because they're holding the Fool out as the 0 that would sort of hover around the edges of this diagram, and the 21 represent the tetractys out to 6. Then you take it a few more rows to the 12th row, and you have the number 78. It takes us to 78 units, which is the number of cards in a full tarot deck. So again, I'm trying to say, so many people focus on the Kabbalistic aspect or the alchemical aspect or the astrological aspect, and they forget that number theory is buried in all of these other more elaborated disciplines. It all has to come through number theory to arrive at alchemy or astrology or Kabbalah. So Pythagorean number theory and sacred geometry that comes to us from our ancients is fundamental. We don't understand how numbers were visualized in the ancient world. It will make it very hard for us to interact with their thinking and find a way to decode the traces they left. Slide 12. Now we're going to be looking beyond the just pure number theory of the really ancient world and investigating the more sophisticated art and science that became astrology. Astrology, the tutor of humanity, the imposer of civilization, the regulator of society, and the timetable keeper of the astrological, technological, and sacred year. So you'll find us as we're moving along, we're moving through time from a very, very ancient worldview to a slightly more developed and sophisticated worldview, which we mark with the literacy and numeracy brought by astrology and astronomy. Slide 13. This lovely image we see here is the result of a long period of time synthesizing the folk observation of planetary cycles into a nice, clean working mathematical machine. So we're long past by eye lunar astrology at this point. We're now into the point where we have settled the signs into exactly 30-degree sections, which of course was something that was done long after those original clumps of stars were first named. There clearly was a point somewhere in the ancient world where the loose visual observations were tightened up into exact 30-degree sections so that it would be possible to do sophisticated calculations. And this is obviously a visualization of that much more mathematical approach to the solar system. Certainly, the constellations were not originally envisioned by our Aboriginal ancestors as being any particular size. Some of them are smaller, some of them are larger. But for the sake of evolving into a more sophisticated mathematics, those henge building and ziggurat and observatory building ancestors of ours needed to refine them down into a standard size. And this is where we get the 12 sign zodiac of 30 degrees each. I can mention while we're looking at this, the controversy that came up recently about the constellation Ophiuchus, which stands between Scorpio and Sagittarius. That's actually down in the November-December area. What we have in that constellation is an outlier from slightly north of the plane of the ecliptic, north of the Milky Way, that has just a few stars that impinge into the space between Scorpio and Sagittarius. This has caused some people to think, oh, maybe we should add a new sign to the zodiac. And our ancestors did warn us, did leave in their myths the clue to watch Ophiuchus, because when we reach a certain point in the precession of the equinoxes, the heel of that figure will touch the Milky Way, will touch into the plane of the ecliptic, and that is a sign to us that we are now in a certain region of cosmic space in which certain effects can be expected, including some of the things we're seeing on the planet right now. Again, my homage to Susan Joy Renison is the source of this information, and so I really suggest that you look into her work, especially the book Tuning the Diamonds, in order to understand this issue with Ophiuchus better. But the point is not to actually try and insert another sign into the zodiac that would throw our calculations into chaos, but it is to recognize that at the point that the foot of Ophiuchus touches that spot on the plane of our ecliptic, then we are at a certain location in space where we're going to be receiving energies pouring out from that spot into our solar system and into our planetary environment. And sure enough, that is indeed happening. So it goes along with the completing of all the old calendars right around the same time right around now, where it seems we've used up the old descriptions and need to start the cycle over again in a new approach. Doesn't mean we blow up our old astrology. It means we realize, oh, the page is turning. We are now officially into a new dispensation. So again, as we're looking at the face of this clock, this cosmic clock, which is another mirror of that lovely pocket watch we saw at the beginning, let's notice that this clock of space actually starts at the fall equinox. You see there to the far right where the scales of Libra are pointing to the number 60 at the outside edge. That's literally where the minute markers start. We usually see the zodiac moving anti-clockwise. But this is the thing, when you try and layer a celestial compass onto a terrestrial compass, you have some accommodations that have to be made. So for some reason, the people who created this clock were marking the fall equinox as the start point. And you can also see, because of that 60 unit graph around the outside edge, that the sexagesimal math is prevailing here. We're using the ancient mileposts and calculation methods that we inherited from long ago, and we're going to go into that sexagesimal math right upcoming here. So I just wanted you to see this so that you could see how this overlay of the signs, the months, the seasons, the hours, and these degrees that mark out all the directions of the heavens, all of this rests on the assumption of a 360-degree wheel. And we could have decided that to use any number of digits to describe what we consider to be a whole or a full circle, but 360 degrees is what our ancestors set for us. This is what we've been calculating with ever since ever. And even if we would have a cataclysm later that would change the length of our year, we would still start again from this 360-degree circle, because that sets forth a coherent mathematics that we can use for minding all of these circles and cycles and keeping them coordinated with each other. So the truth of this, what this clock shows us, is that the planets themselves are the hands of the cosmic clock. The planets that roll around these signs define what time it is, where we are in the great cosmic cycles. Literally, time falls down on us from the sky and regulates our reality here below. So this is our synthetic, highly technological rendering of the aboriginal sky into a mathematical calculator and computer that we can work with to locate ourselves in our own reality. Slide 14. Now we're going to examine this term sexagesimal, which can also be spelled sexagesimal, and I've heard it also spoken as hexadecimal. Basically, the mathematics of 6 times 10. I first read about this and saw it explained inside the book by Ernest G. McLean called The Myth of Invariance, The Origin of the Gods, Mathematics, and Music from the Rig Veda to Plato. Again, let's realize all of this was codified and built into the zodiac at the time of Plato. It was already complete in this very early time, and we find the evidence for that all through his writings, because he was a master of this sexagesimal logic and was attempting to teach us how to think along these lines. So, a little quote from an article I wrote about McLean and the arithmetic of the ancients. Says, the arithmetic of astrology, one of the remarkable achievements of the Babylonian Sumerian culture, is sexagesimal, meaning that it is built on the equation of 6 times 10. MacLean tells us that the sexagesimal system is probably the most convenient language for acoustical arithmetic the world ever knew until late in the 19th century. Now, that blew my mind. It turns out all of our music and tuning systems are cosmogonic and cosmological too. The math of the harmonic sequence is the sexagesimal math. This is the math of astrology as well. So the sexagesimal math, or the math of the harmonic sequence, registers a spiral of infinite, well, regression and progression, because it spirals down away from any note into the lower tones, and it spirals up away from any given note into the higher tones. So in this spiral of infinite regression, this harmonic sequence, as it unfolds, it essentially vibrates the subtle substances of the ethers and precipitates them into manifestation. This is literally what it means when they say, in the beginning is the word, or Buddha breathes out, then everything is created. Everything emerges out of what the Hindus would call Indra's net, the frequency spectrum, which governs light, sound, the planetary orbits, the electrons' activities around the nucleus of an atom, everything from the micro to the macro is arranged along the harmonic sequence. So everything that our senses can pick up is going to be organized through this sexagesimal math, and even many things that our senses cannot pick up. Now, I'm not saying that 6 times 10 is the only math available for the creative spark to work with. I'm saying this is the math of astrology, the math of time and space, and it turns out also to be the math of sound and light as well. So, how did we figure this out? How did we come to this conclusion? I constantly beat my head against the wall of not knowing, because this is so sophisticated and it was captured so early in human history. Anyway, this helps to explain the figure of speech that we've heard through all our different poetry and literature, the music of the spheres, because literally each planet vibrates within its orbital channel according to these musical nodes. Literally, these frequency nodes determine where the orbital bands are around a sun, the sun, any sun. So mostly it's just important for us to witness this inside of ourselves. Just witness the fact that we live in a frequency universe. Our bodies and everything that we look at is the result of converging frequencies, slowing each other down, densifying and firming up into more and more substantial manifestations. And that if we want to change the way things are manifesting, we have to change the frequencies we're emanating. We have to change the tones and colors we're emanating. We have to become more responsible to the frequencies that we have in common with the planets of the solar system, with the colors of the rainbow, with the notes of the scale, because it's all about attunement. Our entire sensory net and the entire material manifestation that we are able to be in touch with is all based on attunement and converging frequencies, and especially harmonically resonant, mathematically compatible frequencies that then can cycle into each other and support each other. So Susan Renaissance goes further and tells us that these frequencies are governed and guided by the electromagnetic net that spreads through the cosmos. And I just think that's another way of saying the very same thing. It's another octave of the frequency-based universe, frequency-based creation that we live in. So when the astrologers are talking about the geometry and mathematics that we use to track motion in time and space, they're really talking about the essential ingredient of manifestational magic. And manifestational magic works from a positive universe that starts with the monad and then breaks the monad out into whatever frequencies we're exploring in order to enter into the world or the phase of the world that we wish to experience. So the astrological world hangs from the sexagesimal math, which the Babylonian Sumerian culture pioneered or originated or first discovered. And it's from that specific lens, from looking through the world, through that specific lens at the world, that we have been able to acquire this insight. Slide 15. Here we see two different versions of the sexagesimal grid. One created by the Greeks, that's the cosmic fishnet, and two created by the Hebrews, that's the honeycomb format. Now, the Greeks arrived at this cosmic fishnet through their explorations of the diameter of a circle, their attempt to try and square the circle and create the circle from the center point. So you can see what they've done. They're working with straight lines. They're trying to, break out the manifested universe from the epicenter and use the mathematics of the circle to derive the physical world as we experience it. Now, this is a very different approach than what the Hebrews were doing through their exploration of the Vesica Piscis, which is that little pointed oval section that appears when two circles overlap each other. So the Hebrews were studying basically honeycomb and sexagesimal patterns in nature. We'll see a few others in subsequent slides, but right here you see the idealized version of it, and you can see the Kabbalah tree laid over that matrix. One of the things that I didn't mention earlier on that Tetractys slide is that the Tetractys also participates in this honeycomb geometry. You can also lay it over the sexagesimal grid and see its participation as well. So you can also lay the zodiac, the 12 signs, over the sexagesimal grid and see their participation. Basically, on the cosmic fishnet, each sign would be half of one of those outer edges, one of the 6 flat sides in the cosmic fishnet. So there are a number of mystical diagrams and paradigms that emerge as a result of us focusing on the sexagesimal math as our spiritual and technological praxis for describing reality. Because we settled on the sexagesimal math, our other mysteries, Kabbalah and sacred geometry and other kinds of mathematically based esoteric productions, are all resident within this sexagesimal grid and the sexagesimal math. So this is another proof that all of the world's mysteries come from the same source. They come from the same base understanding of reality. Slide 16. So the sexagesimal grid of 6 times 10 is at the foundation of humanity's ability to translate movement in space into movement in time and vice versa. 6 times 10 decodes the way we understand and organize space-time, and also how we organize ourselves within space-time. One of the amazing mysteries of this math of time is that it's keyed to the human heartbeat. 1 second equals 1 heartbeat, 60 seconds, 1 minute, 60 minutes, 1 hour, and so on. Now, who knew this? I mean, this can't be arbitrary. It blows my mind. I'm thrilled to see it, but it only opens more mysteries to our continuous perusal. Slide 17. I'm showing you this because I want you to realize and remember that the sexagesimal math is not the only productive math humanity has used in our art, in our music, in our creativity overall. Different worlds emerge from each number. So in this case, this is a mosaic from the Islamic culture, and they, in all of their mosaics all over the world, in their temple building architecture, they use divisions of 5 and 10 for their mosaics. So the segments have 72 and 36 degree angles in them. And this is from those smaller angles they build their larger art, which is awesome and psychedelic and gorgeously beautiful. So this just shows you how you could get to the same goal, the same 360 degree wheel. This mystery of the 5 and 10 leading to a 360 degree circle has provided the basis for a huge amount of argument and controversy between the Islamic world and the Greco-Roman or the Old and New Testament world, the Judeo-Christian inheritance. When you look at the world through divisions of 6, you see something different than when you look at the world through divisions of 5. This kind of schism, it's theoretical in the sense that, I mean, we don't argue about whether we divide our gas bill by 5 or 6 in order to figure out the proper currency to pay it in. We don't argue about whether to use a 5-based counting system or a 6-based counting system when we are measuring out the yards at the racetrack. It's not a practical argument, but because the theologians are living at this refined and literally mathematical level of spiritual discourse, these things become bludgeons we use to hammer on each other. So in the Renaissance, they called this the war between the 10 and the 12, the war between the zodiacally based cultures, which would include the Hebrew people. They were a 12-tribe culture, versus those cultures that were based on the decade, like the Roman numerals based in 10, or the numerals the Arabics brought from the Hindus, also based in 10. So interestingly enough, in the Renaissance, Europe was divided against the Jews and biased towards Islamic theology, because the Islamic culture is what retained the teachings of Plato and Pythagoras when the Western world went into its so-called Dark Ages. So there was a strong bias in the Renaissance towards the learning of the Islamic nations, and a feeling like whatever came through the Hebrew channel was old hat, just like Old Testament. But really, you can't have the astronomical math without both 5 and 6, or without both 10 and 12, because 5 gives us the decade and 6 gives us the zodiac. So in order to have the sexagesimal grid, which is founded in 10 times 6, you can't set 5 and 6 against each other. This is like rooting for your football team's offensive squad but booing their defensive squad. It makes no sense. You've got to have both, and the grid, even as defined by sexagesimal math, still produces the 8-pointed star, still responds to the divisions into 5-degree segments and multiplying of, 72 and 36 degree angles to make these beautiful Islamic mosaics. It's not against God to calculate by 5 instead of 6. It's not heretical to utilize all the different fractions in order to produce beautiful music, beautiful art, beautiful scientific and spiritual theory. This is just absurdity. We have gotten led into these religious debates because of high-level theorizing on the part of our priesthoods that doesn't even render down into our outer lives to make such a huge difference. These things have gotten dogmatized and frozen into irrationality when, if we could follow them back up to their higher levels of thinking, like this beautiful geometric mosaic that we're looking at here, it's simply another way of arriving at the same understanding. It's all the same 360-degree wheel. We just divide it by different numbers for different reasons. So let us not be fooled by all of this theological legerdemain that the big talkers are using to pull our strings and polarize us. It is not a war between 10 and 12. It is not a war between unbelieving Islam and super believing Christianity. It is simply the contrast between different numbers projected over the whole. And sorry for that digression, but we really have to grow up. Slide 18. This is a really fascinating point of view exercise. I found, it looks to me like these two illustrations were made by the same person, but I found them in two different books. The one on the left is the fractal geometry of a pine cone that I took from The Power of Limits by Georgie Doxey, a really amazing and wonderful book on sacred geometry. On the right, we see what's called the Net of Indra, an illustration of the sacred Omphalos stone found in the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. Certain things are obvious just looking at this, but I will mention them anyway because we're not completely used to this kind of thinking. What we have is contrasting views on eternity versus time. You notice the left view shows you everything at once, all in one simultaneous now. You're looking down on the top of it. It's the expanding sexagesimal grid with these nice little intersections established. You see everything from birth to death all at one time, or everything from beginning to end flattened down into a simple circular diagram. This is exactly what we do to the astrology of time and space in order to do your birth chart. We take everything that was spread around you and consolidate it, bam, onto one single snapshot, as if one slice of the caterpillar was the whole caterpillar. So this would be analogous to an image of eternity. Whereas on the right, where you see the pine cone from the side view, this is the experience of us crawling through time, having to follow a particular line, not able to be on all the lines at once, moving through the thick substance of time, having to fight through resistance, occasionally crossing our own path, oftentimes feeling alone, but eventually ending up converging at the top. I mean, if we were imagining this running from the bottom to the top, it takes time and effort to get through it, and you don't encompass the whole all at one time. What you experience is whatever line you're on. So this can help us to realize the same thing seems very different when looked at from a different angle. Our experience in time comes because we're crawling along those extended lines of that pine cone. And remember that spiral staircase I showed you earlier. Everything's going circular, but it's going circular along an axis, and so it extends that circle into a cycle and strings it out into a long streamer. Whereas from the point of view of the soul, who stands at the center of it all of time is embraced in 1 second, in one breath, which is the image on the left, the simultaneity of everything. So let us not be fooled by the fact that some cycles take a long time to play out, whereas others seem to complete themselves as quickly as you can think of them. This is just a matter of the angle of the dangle, so to speak, the direction from which we approach our reality. And this lets us know we do have many different ways of knowing what we know and coming to our truths. So when you hear something explained in a way that doesn't sound exactly the same as what you're used to, let's try and remember somebody may be dividing the pie into an slightly different set of intervals than you are. Same pie. So we don't have to fight about it. We just have to learn to see things through different lenses at different times based on what's appropriate. Slide 19. So the sexagesimal grid gives us the basis of the systems from which are derived sacred calendars, the computation of the seasons, the Masonic mathematics that builds the observatories, hinges, ziggurats, and temples. This is the basis of the celestial compass, and this is what allowed us to move from lunar calculations to solar calculations by forcing us to develop a system where we could divide the arc of the heavens using whole numbers to express it. And whole numbers are real key here because we didn't have all of our sophisticated decimal system and all kinds of mathematical fancy technologies in the ancient times. We basically had the abacus, and that counts in terms of positive numbers, and it's base 9, and it really holds the mind into a certain way of looking at things. So this sophistication that we've acquired has really come at a certain cost in terms of really taxing our consciousness to move beyond just the physical appearance of things and into this abstract level of thinking and calculation that characterizes our species now. Slide 20. This is an exquisite image that our modern scientists think was not available to ancient man because we only have looked at it recently as a result of using computers to generate these kinds of, the word that comes up to my head is rapidograph diagram based on many, many orbits it's really the dance between the Earth and Venus over an 8-year period. This is the mathematical image that Venus makes in her dance around the Earth while the two of them are dancing around the sun. Here again, geometry and mathematics are showing us a way of looking into and through the world, through the appearances of the world, in order to see these inherent geometrical patterns that everything is creating in its extended expression through time. So again, modern scientists think nobody saw this before we had computers, but I've already pointed out one place where it appears naturally just through the unfolding of, simple mathematics in the building of mosaics. And I'm going to be pointing out a couple of other places where this acknowledgement or understanding of this particular Venusian cycle with the Earth shows up in other ancient astronomical paradigms. So, another one of those things. How did we know this, something that only is visible from space? How did we know it when we were still pre-technological? A very big question. Try to remember this for when we get around to the Mayan calendar slide at the end. Slide 21. I'm just going to use this slide to remind us that the sexagesimal grid is actually around us all over the place in nature. This is a sunflower. You can also see it on calendula flowers. We've seen the honeycomb. And, with these different visual ideas in our mind, we can actually begin to go around and see it all kinds of places. And it isn't just the sexagesimal grid, because the math of the pentagram, which is the 5-pointed star, appears in nature. The Star of David, the 6-pointed star, the 7-pointed star, which we geometers associate with the 7 visible planets. The 8-pointed star is the compass. Lately, we've been seeing more and hearing more about the Enneagram, the 9-pointed star. These are all divisions of the one by different numbers, and they all appeared on that tetractys that I showed you, and that graph of dividing 1 into 2, into 3, into 4. So nature's full of this stuff. You can't get away from it. Sacred geometry is the method by which matter is built out of sound and light. And everything in nature is revealing its intercoherence, internal coherence with these natural principles. And therefore, we don't have to wonder if this is not just theory. It emerges forth from us all the time, from all directions. You cut an apple, there it is. Many flowers throughout our beautiful world are mathematically arranged. It's awesome to see once we get down into it. And this is, again, how we see the archetypes externalizing into nature. The archetypes, the numbers, as the first things, that which was there from the beginning, arche, the first creation. So we are never far removed from the evidence of our participation in the sacred geometrical dance of light and sound. It is the root of everything we experience and everything we are. And no wonder so much energy and attention now is going on to the healing and attunement of the light body. This is the technology of the future. We will be returning to being tutored by the light. That is our evolutionary direction. Slide 22. Now we're going to spend a minute looking at the particular endowment that came to us from the Babylonian civilization and was taken around the world by the Phoenicians and has become the astronomical tutor for all the ancient civilizations. Slide 23. This is a modern example of the astrological tables that the Babylonians originally invented. They invented this table to organize observable motion in space and capture terrestrial time to demonstrate its orderliness. Literally, the graph of rows and columns was invented by the Babylonians for astrology. And I want to remind you that at that time, a very long time ago, the signs in the heavens and the seasons of the year had not departed away from each other. So the Babylonians actually codified the process of writing it all down. But they were doing so before or in the era close enough to the time when all these things were regulated mathematically, as I said before, down to the 30-degree exact equality of each sign and stuff. When that scientific regulation was stamped down onto the aboriginal zodiac overhead, that was the time that the Babylonians determined this writing system so they could begin to keep track of it in these tables of rows and columns. So since that time, the tilt of the earth wobbles the same way that a top wobbles as it's losing its spin. And so we're not always angled in the direction that will make the constellations be coherent with our seasons. So we lean away and lean towards at different periods of a millennium, because this is the precession of the equinoxes takes a very long time. So the ephemeris is not exactly perfect and square to the signs as we see them in the heavens. There are times when it comes back around
and this everything matches up, and there's other times when, and most of the time, when things are a little askew. So this is the difference between tropical and sidereal astrology. And I don't want to get caught up in the modern commercial competitions. There's value in each form. Sidereal astrology looks up and reads what's coming down from heaven through the constellations as we see them. And tropical astrology looks down into the earth and reads time from the seasons, from the solstices and equinoxes. So at this point, there's a 20 some odd, 22 degree divergence between them. And people can get confused because different astrologers seem to be speaking from different models. And that's the difference, because the signs overhead are not aligned with the seasons on the earth anymore. Or maybe what I should say is the earth is not aligned with the zodiac in the same way as it was when the signs were named. So we now in the Western world start Aries at the spring equinox, and we don't care what constellation is on that east point on the first hour of the first day of the spring equinox. We just say this is the beginning of Aries, and that's how it is. So that can seem arbitrary to some, but you have to set your marker somewhere, or you can't even start your measurements. So don't be confused. Siderealists look up and follow the constellations. Tropical astrologers look down and follow the seasons. So same zodiac, we're still inside the same circle of time. It's just, again, a different way of talking about it. This is a human problem, really. The solar system doesn't care at all. As a matter of fact, those constellations only exist because we're standing on the ground looking at them. They're simply things that are in the same line of sight as we look off the surface of the earth. They are not together in any literal sense at all. But they do represent quadrants of space, and there's clearly different energies that come to us from different quadrants of space. So the constellations make a fine way of talking about those things and helping us all look in the same direction when we're talking about it. So this is really the significance of these constellations. They could be called by any names. If we were in some different solar system and had to do this all over again, we could set out any 12. We could call them by the names of baseball teams. We could call them by the names of different animals like the Mayans did. It wouldn't matter. It's not about the names. It's about dividing the space around us into the sexagesimal net and then defining the sections of the net. In order that you can see this a little bit more clearly now, I'm going to ask you to look closely at this graph and see it down on the far left. You see a stack of numbers 1 through 30. Those are the days of the month. And running in that black row across the top, you see the planets, the sun, then the moon, then what's called the North Node. That's actually not a planet. It's a feature of the moon's orbit. Then Mercury, Venus, Mars, etc., from the fastest moving to the slowest moving. Each planet is given for its location at midnight. So once every 24 hours, all the locations are registered again. And you can see how fast the moon moves, just 2.5 days, and it's in another sign, and another sign, another sign, all the way around. Whereas some of these planets go out to the far right. You see the slow-moving planet of Pluto takes almost a month just to get across 1 degree. And if you're looking at the Pluto column, at the very top, it says 9 degrees Capricorn, 25 minutes, 24 seconds. So literally, it only makes a certain number of seconds, maybe 1 minute of motion, a little over a minute of motion per day. And again, remember, hours, minutes, and seconds of time are also hours, minutes, and seconds of motion. This is the mystery of astrology, is that we have managed to turn motion in space into a reliable register of movement through time. And the cosmic clock is our mechanism for organizing ourselves in a space-time fashion. So when you see this print in red, that means that the planet that's being listed has gotten on the other side of the sun from us, and its light is so distorted and bent around the solar field, this electromagnetic field of the sun, that it makes the planet appear to be going backwards. That's what they call retrograde. So when a planet is retrograde, it is delivering bent light from the far side of the sun, and therefore its influence is going to be different than it is when it appears to be moving in normal fashion. Now, the planets never go backwards. They do not. Do not even succumb to that illusion for 1 second. This is simply an optical illusion based on its position relative to ourselves and the distortion of the solar field. So it is not an event in the outer world, is an event in the inner world, because we're creatures of light, and when we are receiving bent light, that affects our ability to metabolize that light into our reality. So again, it's all frequency issues here, and our ability to harmonize with these frequencies as they undergo their changes. Slide 24. I'm just using this slide to solidify some of the points that have been made. The ephemeris was developed and came into firm usage circa 2000 BC, went around the world and became collective property after that time. And with all of our modern scientific acuity, we have not invented a better way of representing these movements. And so we still use this system. Again, degrees, minutes, and seconds of motion are degrees, minutes, and seconds of time. And when we finally got this registered to us in something as tidy as the ephemeris, we began to realize, oh, okay, the cosmos is orderly. It is predictable. We aren't just floating in chaos. We can see ourselves coming. And not only can we see ourselves coming, but we can see ourselves going. We can look forward and back in time because we know where everything's going to be. We know where everything was. As a matter of fact, our current space program, NASA, the Russian space program, and every other one depends on the Babylonian ephemeris and all the record keeping that they did these thousands of years ago, because we weren't able to correct our own modern calculations and expectations until we could have recourse to an ancient source that had enough data laid in there that we could, calculate the time between and make sure to check that our assumptions matched theirs. So it wasn't until we actually began digging up the Babylonian records, the 2,000 years of cuneiform tablets that they left, that we could correct our own calculations well enough to have a space mission. So astronomers and astrologers use the same ephemeris. The ephemeris I calculate charts from was generated by NASA. Okay? We have never stepped out of our ancestors' footprints. We are still learning from our ancestors. We don't even know what they knew that we don't know, or we haven't rediscovered yet. Slide 25. I want to just use this slide to discriminate one layer of thought between the Babylonians and the Phoenicians. The Babylonians were the ziggurat builders and the priests whose nightly labors laid down the ephemerises and created these deep stacks of research, at least on the ancient visible planets, and other things, meteors, showers, comets, all kinds of things they were recording. But that gave us our deep background for our current calculations. But the Phoenicians came after the Babylonians. They lived on a little skinny section of shoreline in the Eastern Mediterranean. They did not have a lot of land, but they were great shipbuilders and they were wonderful navigators, and so they made it around the world. and made up in scope what they lacked in physical space on the ground. We have found evidence of Phoenician travel in all kinds of places, everywhere where astrology moved from lunar-based to solar-based. It happened because the Phoenicians were once trading with the peoples in that land, and they dropped off the ephemeris, and they taught them the alphabet and taught them how to keep their own records. So it was the Phoenicians. We actually can determine how many different civilizations, what rate at which they evolved into their own mathematics and their own astronomy, based on the point at which they began to take notes and calculate with the sexagesimal system. And then later, you find several generations later that a culture that's been exposed to the Phoenician alphabet and the ephemeris then begins to generate their own mathematicians. And at a certain point, they turn around and make corrections to the errors that the Babylonians had not solved in the ephemeris. And at that point, you see a culture then has its own indigenous astrology. So this cycle is repeated around the world as different cultures get into this trading net and get access to the alphabet and get access to the ephemeris. And at that point, then they begin to stand on their own legs mathematically and scientifically, and within X number of generations, different civilizations take different times. They eventually create their own mathematicians who can think in this bigger scope, and at that point then their astrology starts to diverge from what they inherited from the Babylonians. So this is documentable trajectory of human learning as the Phoenicians went around the world dropping this revelation off in different places. So they weren't, by the way, the Phoenicians weren't temple builders, they were traders. And so they used the ephemeris to get them around across oceans and across giant continents, but they also used the number letters that came with the ephemeris to write their trading notes, keep track of what was in their hold, to keep track of how much money they were making, earning and spending, and to, document their voyages and travels. So it's very interesting how the script that was invented for the priesthoods, for them to do their higher science, ends up going around the world as the basis of our alphabet and different spoken languages. Slide 26. This is the ancient Phoenician alphabet, the alphabet of antiquity, upon which then the Hebrew alphabet is based, and all other magical alphabets come from it. Now, linguistic archaeologists have traced this back into many different ancient civilizations. Basically, what you need to know about an alphabet is that it is a symbol set that's less than 30 units. And they all really boil down to this one, although when it moved from the Phoenician into the Semitic language groups, then different people speaking different languages might have invented a few more widgets to represent sounds that they make that other people don't. But the rule of alphabets are that they are less than 30 characters. If it's up to 60 characters, then it's a syllabary. If it's more than that, then you're getting into characters and other kinds of notation systems. But what is unique about the Phoenician alphabet, as you can see from the name of it, is that it's phonetic. These are not symbols of things, although they have little names for them like door, window, camel, house. These are extreme contractions of what would be the stories that go along with these little widgets. But an alphabet is phonetic. It is registering sounds. It is not pictographic. It's much more concentrated than pictographs. You look at the Chinese characters, they've got thousands of pictographs. Even when they boil it down to the modern ones, they've still got hundreds. It's such a challenging thing to learn because the pictographic alphabet, like the Egyptian, has many, many, many little widgets that get combined and decombined and shifted around, and who can keep track of it all? But a phonetic alphabet can skip from language to language and even leave the language groups that it was born amongst, because it's all sound based. So anybody who's speaking in any language, you can transliterate it into phonetic characters. So this is one of the very interesting aspects of those alphabet-based civilizations. And I'm talking from Sanskrit all the way up to the Druidic runes. We have the alphabet was so attractive and so useful that it leaked way beyond the Semitic national regions and became the possession of everybody. Went all the way into India, went all the way to the western fringes of Europe, went down into Africa. I mean, everybody found a great amount of use for this. So just like the ephemeris with its, numbers and rows showing the movements of the planets, this alphabet that was used to fill in the ephemeris also traveled around the world and educated people about writing. And also, what is not on this little presentation here is the fact that each letter is a number. So this alphabet starts in the upper right corner and unfolds leftward. This is how ancient reading went. So Aleph is 1, Beth is 2, Gimel is 3, Daleth is 4, Hey is 5, Bob is 6, Zion is 7, so etc. These numbers actually are arranged to represent celestial values as well. And inside the 22 unit alphabet are letters for the 12 signs, letters for the 7 visible planets, and letters for the 3 celestial elements, fire, water, and air. Earth is considered a composite element that is the result of all those other things. Just like I was telling you before, the matter and arrangement of matter that we see here is the result of the frequencies raining down on us from the heavens, the light frequencies and other levels of frequencies that, the sounds, the scents, the Ormus elements, whatever's precipitating down from the cosmos. So these letters are also of that same character. They stand for sound values. They stand for number values. They stand for celestial objects in the sky that we use to measure time and movement by. And so if you can imagine that ephemeris that I showed you in with the Arabic numerals and our modern scientific zodiac signs and our current modernly spelled words, we have separated the numbers from the letters from the astrological symbols. So when we make a graph like that, the numbers show up as different than the astronomical symbols, and that shows up as different than the letters that we spell words with, okay? But when that ephemeris was written by the Babylonians, they used the same symbol for a spoken word, for an object that's up in the sky, an astrological or astronomical feature, and for a particular number that they're trying to express. So they would, a word that's spelled out in letters could also be a number that's spelled out in those same characters. It could also be a reference to a planet moving through a sign. This made the ephemerises very difficult to read. If you were not an initiate, you didn't know what that table full of gibberish represented. You would have to already know how to read it in order to see that this planet is in this degrees of this sign on this day, because it's all spelled out in these same 22 characters. And the reader has to be able to sort out, does this character stand for a number? Does it stand for a planet? Does it stand for, is it part of a word that's being spelled? So literally in magic, when they talk about spells, they are literally talking about assemblages of these letters in order to make meaningful references to the divine cosmos. So when I'm saying a name of one of these ancient god forms, that name is not only resonating the sounds of speech that make it up. If I say Diana, if I say Yahweh, if I say Zeus, I'm not just resonating certain sounds in order to point to a word. I'm also resonating certain astrological elements, and I'm resonating certain numeric frequencies which touch out into the matrix of creation. So how did the Babylonians know to do this? Who told them that you can condense 3 different scales of reality into one 22-unit alphabet and speak to all the phenomena of the world? Who told them how to do this? It blows my mind. Just one last remark about this slide. The alphabet, therefore, comprises the ultimate magician's kit. The 22 letters of the ancient alphabet is a master cosmobiological compilation of signs, planets, and elements. And these things cannot be taken apart. The astronomical references, the mathematical references, and the sonic linguistic references are simultaneous and are the ultimate tools by which any magician from any tradition is affecting the world. Slide 27. So we have to remember these Babylonian ephemerata, or that's plural of ephemerises, were not perfect. They had errors. They had misconceptions. They had not finished sorting it all out as the ephemeris started traveling around the world. So as those flaws were propagated, different cultures had to bump their heads up against the phenomena of nature to try and figure out what was wrong with these miraculous tables they had found. And over time, thereby, they managed to cultivate mathematicians who could think things through well enough to make sense of those errors and bring about a reformation. So we can actually chart the growth of different civilizations based on the rate at which they worked through the errors in the Babylonian ephemeris. So, just a reminder, it is the Babylonians who invented the letters, figured out how to tabulate the movements of the planets, and sent that revelation forward into time. It is the Phoenicians who took it around the world, taught the world to write in letters and numbers, and demonstrated that these simple sound values could be convertible to any language. Then later, the Pythagoreans, part of the Greek number mystic lineage, added a technosis, I guess, of harmonic tuning and attunement theory in general. So they were the ones who constructed the magical god names and the sonic spells of the ancient vowel-based hymns, and therefore all the old temple liturgies and spiritual hymns and song stories were interwoven with this Pythagorean harmonic tuning theory. And this is where you get the kind of spiritual manifestations like we read about with the Tibetans and the Maya, who could, with their orchestras and their chanting, could literally quarry rock and airlift it over to be dropped into places where they were building temples. They could literally use their gnosis of sound and frequency to shape matter directly and build their temples and stupas and different things using sound alone and directed consciousness. So then finally, the final contribution to this is the Arabic letters that the Arabics got from the Hindus, or excuse me, not letters, but numbers. And from that, the single numbers 0 through 9 or 1 through 10, we then strengthened our understanding of 10-based calculation, and that brought the old astrology into a much greater focus for us, because we no longer had to deal with these, three-pronged widgets, but could separate out letters from numbers and the astrological sign symbols, so that lay people who weren't initiates could also see into this model and understand what was going on. Slide 28. Everything that I've talked about up to this point is involved with the process of shifting from shamanism to priestcraft. Now I can finally kind of take an overview of this and help us appreciate this transformation in consciousness that we have come through as a species to become the creatures that we are. Many, many different assumptions have been built into what seem to be the simple tables of motion of astrological ephemerises. I've brought you through a number of different layers of theological and scientific understanding that has to all come into place for us to shift from just tabulating the 13 moons of the year by eye to calculating our current 365-day year down to the minute and the second. It's a great mathematical feat to be able to see the integration of the moon cycle and the sun cycles. It spreads over 50 years to get the same alignment of the sun and the moon twice. It's a 50-year cycle between the two of them. So again, you have to have a settled priesthood and a settled civilization in order to even see it. You can't be having devastating wars. You can't be nomadic. You can't be constantly changing your currency and your number systems and stuff with different regimes coming and going. It requires a very stable civilization to actually take advantage of the sexagesimal grid and construct the planisphere and to begin to imagine the way we live under the sky. So we really, without the sexagesimal grid and this long mathematical evolution where we can finally, organize these different cycles within each other, you can't arrive at the four-dimensional planisphere that is our map of time and space. These are, these assumptions are hard won. They take generations to digest. I mean, even if this entire model fell down from heaven complete, and who knows, maybe it did. Maybe we were visited in ancient times by astronomers who gave us this paradigm. Even still, it took us a very long time to, get a hold of it, to really wrestle it into a shape where we could work with it and to break it out of the very cryptic notation forms we first inherited so that it would become visible to everybody and not just be a mystery kept in a closely held cabal like our priesthoods. So it continues to be a mystery how these things that really can only be seen from outer space or from a deep space perspective came into the hands of our ancestors. But this is the process by which we moved from shamans watching the moon to scientists watching the heavens as a whole. Slide 29. Now, just to make sure I've tied up these ideas completely, let's remember that the navigators were not priests. When this stuff fell into the hands of people who were traveling and using the ephemeris and using these astrological calculations to get themselves around the world, they weren't interested in spiritual myths of gods and goddesses. They were much more interested in watching planets move across discernible intervals of the sky and measuring where they were in relation to those planets so that they could find themselves in great open spaces like oceans and deserts. They needed to be able to see their relative position on the surface of the planet from the changes they were witnessing in the sky. So the specialized vocabulary of astronomy provided them with a way of talking about the map overhead, which they could then move through on the ground below. So these 30-degree sections, which were inherited from the priestcraft, which were inherited from the names of the signs of the zodiac and this 30-degree model, gets broken down into smaller and smaller sections in order to facilitate more exact representation of motion. So the 30-degree signs get broken down into 10-degree sections called decanates. Those get broken in half into what are called the Shem angels. There's also 28 segments in the zodiac that are called the lunar mansions. Then you get even smaller degrees, 2.5-degree segments called, I think, I can't remember the name. The Hindus use them. The individual degrees each have their own legends. Even sub-degrees are sometimes used by astrologers with great need for precision. So for mythological purposes, these different divisions end up being personified. They end up being thought of as angels, demons, entities of one kind or another, and they find their way into the myths and legends as actors, as if they were entities like you and me. But this is a result of the cosmic game of postman. This is not because these things were originally present themselves as creatures. It's because when you're trying to speak astrological shorthand, instead of saying Venus is at 22 degrees, 52 minutes and 7 seconds of a given sign, you will say instead, oh, Venus is standing with this angel. Venus is passing through this little decanate. And you're saying the same thing, but because of the tendency for lay people to personify science mythically, and maybe the priests, in order to keep their sciences covered, encouraged that attitude. But what you end up with is a world that's populated with all these angels and demons, and people viewing those angels and demons as if they were walking around creatures doing things to us, when they're actually segments of the heavens. They're actually small little pie slices of cosmic space wrapped around us. And we've given them all names, and we've given them all qualities. We've given them all kinds of attributes, because for thousands of years we've been rolling inside of this circle. And when different things happen and a planet is standing in a given place, and we've associated that planet and that place with a given event, then we start thinking, well, my gosh, that spot in the heavens houses a demon. That given point in the celestial compass produces evil for humans. And so then we think that point on the compass is inherently bad. And we call it the name of a demon or an evil creature. But what we're actually talking about is features of space weather. As I said before, the signs represent regions of space in which certain kinds of energies come to us. That extra zodiac sign Ophiuchus represents a doorway through which every 11,000 years we get a space fall of Ormus elements. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean there's a demon there. It means events happen through that portal, events of a certain type, qualities of a certain type pour down on us from that direction of space. And anything that's moving through that direction of space will be affected by that energy. So I say this because we have a very credulous way of believing terminologies that attribute psychological and spiritual qualities to the things in our world, when really the things in our world are the result of frequencies and vibrations that accumulate matter that qualifies those vibrations, matter that represents and stands for and physically manifests those vibrations. It's all based on frequencies, and some frequencies are more comfortable to humans than others. Although they may not be evil, they may support other life forms than our own. They may represent different kinds of processes than our type of creature comfortably goes through. But that doesn't make those processes or those frequencies into demons. They are just part of the spectrum of everything that is. So when this astronomical science gets turned into lore so that it can be taught as myth to the peasants who don't understand the science, then suddenly we find ourselves personifying these astral values as if they were beings and as if they were doing things to us, as if they had motives and were good and evil. The reality of good and evil is manifested in the world as we experience it, which is the outcome of all of these frequencies as they fall down from the heaven onto us and shape up into the forms around us. But they are not themselves motivated by the human worldview. They're not limited to our little time-space island in the cosmos. These are archetypes. These are cosmic natural laws, and we experience the outcome of them, but those outcomes are far distant from their causes. Just like the warmth or cold that we experience here on the earth is far distant from the sun that donates its light and energy for us to have our different stages of weather. So we have to stop being so credulous and stop assuming that because something has a name, it therefore has an ego and an attitude just like we do. Many things that have been named and added into our science and added into our understanding of the world, their principles, their frequencies, their natural processes, they are not beings. We have personified them into beings because we don't understand what they are. So I'm trying to encourage people to demystify the science of astrology and therefore all the other esoteric sciences that rest on astrology, because it isn't about a world populated with good and evil. It is about a reality that exists across a broad, vast, expanding continuum of frequencies that produce every manifestation we've ever experienced and every one we ever will experience. So we need to start thinking more like that priestly caste of initiates who hold the science and understand the cosmos from this macrocosmic level, and stop ghettoizing our thinking inside of the limits of what our mythography has made of that ancient science. I hope I'm not speaking gibberish here. It makes a very big difference to how we translate our world, whether we're going to throw human personifications outwards onto everything, or whether we're going to experience this reality like the initiates did, as a infinite continuum of possibilities within which it is our job to qualify the frequencies we wish to live. Now, slide 30, the 12 knotted rope. This here is one of the least understood phenomena of the ancient world, and represents the priestly high-tech secret of the ancient Masons. From ancient times, if you were a Mason, and I'm not talking about the modern Masons established in the late 1700s, I'm talking about the ancient temple builders, which traditionally the Hebrews, the whole Hebrew nation was the source of the original Masons, who then went around and taught this same astro-numerological geometric mysteries around the world, basically on the backs of the Phoenician traders. So initiates of ancient masonry were issued a staff and a 13-sectioned rope, 12 knots of 13 exact same sections. Usually it was scaled to the person's body. So like one section would be the length of their hand or the length of their forearm. So each person would get their own cord. They would wear it with them the rest of their lives. And with that cord and that staff, they could erect a henge or a temple completely from scratch. And that temple would then be able to be used as a cosmic clock and a ceremonial center from which to celebrate these cosmic holidays. I'm going to quote to you now from a book by Nigel Pennick on sacred geometry, and he's the source of this little snippet here. Here's what he said about it. Laying out the temple by means of the cord, which is called the cording of the temple, was attended with a ceremonial that was comparable with the modern laying of a foundation stone. The cord had a twofold function: to fix the orientation of the temple by direct observation of a celestial object, and also thence to lay out by simple geometry the sacred pattern of the temple itself. After the fixing of the orientation upon the constellation of the bull's foreleg, which is now known as the plough or Ursa Major, the rope fasteners would find a line at right angles to it by means of creating a 3-4-5 triangle, and from that they could lay out the whole temple. This seems pretty condensed, and he did fail to mention the fact that this observation would have to be done on a flat plane with an easy view of the full horizon in all four directions, and that before the day of the cording of the temple was done, somebody would have had to have done a series of observations on that flat plane to lay out the path of the sun so that they could have the extreme north point and south point to mark the solstices, and so that from there they could find the center point that would mark the equinoxes. Then on an equinox day, this little ritual could be done of the cording of the temple, because the staff would be planted. It would serve as a gnomon or throw a shadow, and as that shadow forms up at the rising of the sun, then the 12 knotted rope would be angled to the east point, set from the shadow thrown by the gnomon. Your 3-pointed triangle would be set. Then you'd lay out your 90-degree angles. Then you'd have your cube upon which you could build the rest of the temple, and it would be perfectly aligned to the sunset point, the east point, first day of one of the two equinoxes. And from there you could build out and build up and create the openings that would then make your building into a astronomical computer, because just with the staff and the 12 knotted cord. So here we see a sophisticated problem, super sophisticated problem, being solved without computation, because the user is familiar with solar system dynamics, familiar enough to harness natural phenomena in a systematic way. Now this little image is from page 44 of Nigel Pennick's book, Sacred Geometry. But this is the only place I have ever seen anybody clearly state the basic technique for how the ancients platted out their observatories, whether everything from Stonehenge all the way up to the Vatican Observatory. This is how it's done. So again, the sophistication of our ancestors is unbelievable. We need to diminish our sense of pride in ourselves and awaken some humility while we turn back and study what was known long before us. Slide 31. This is evidence of a Mesoamerican calendar that has almost completely outgrown its old world origins. This is the Mayan calendar. The Mayan civil calendar is what's wrapped around the outside edge here, calculated in base 20. This fits into the idealized 360-degree wheel very neatly by rolling a 20-day smaller wheel 18 times around the big wheel of the zodiac. This gets you to 360 degrees, and then you can add your 5 leap days to accommodate to the irregularities that have crept into the planet's orbit since the time this was first set down. So, I mean, if the planet were to change its orbit, maybe your number of leap days would change, but the 360-degree wheel is the base premise here. Now, they didn't bother themselves with the year the way we do, the 360-degree or 365-day year, which their concern with this calendar, which is called the Hob, is about those 20-day small wheel circuits and following them 18 times around the year and then having those 5-day holidays. So they had, however, a second ceremonial calendar called the Tzolk'in, and that's what's in the center here. And that ceremonial calendar, also 360 days, characterized by 20 periods of 13 days each. So again, we got our division by 20, but this time it's 20 periods of 13. And when you sort that out, this refers back to the orbit of Venus and Venus's relationship with the sun. And it results in the 52-year cycle that matches quite closely with the integration of the moon's orbits with the sun's orbits, with our, solar year that we know now. So somehow these guys, taking the Babylonian ephemeris with the core assumption of the 360-degree wheel, they decided we're going to strip off this division of everything by 12. We're going to do divisions by 20. We've got 20 days rolling 18 times around to create the big civic 360-degree wheel calendar, and we've got a smaller circuit of 13 days running 20 times inside of the same 360-degree wheel, giving us the Venus calendar. So you would almost not think that they were doing the same astrology as our ancient ancestors in the Middle East, except that you have to come back to the fact that they are based in a 360-degree count. They picked up that feature of the ancient ephemeris, deconstructed the math, reconstructed it with a new base, and have created this exquisite and vast macrocosmic computer that can encompass huge scopes of time, much bigger than our Western astrologers are used to dealing with. Now, the same thing happened in a different way with the Hindu astrologers. They also have figured out how to use our basic 360-degree wheel to do vastly expanded mathematics, which they would do in their heads, an amazing feat. But again, you can see that everybody's grounded in the Babylonian ephemerises, but their cultural and spiritual sophistication would grow once they could deconstruct the math and reconstruct it according to their own chosen assumptions. It's all about what divisor you pick. once you've accepted this 360-degree wheel as the whole and the sexagesimal math as its denominator, then you can choose to break it down and rebuild it any number of ways, but it always comes back to this sexagesimal base. Slide 32. Now we've come full circle here today in our discussion of the ancient sacred calendar, and I wanted you to just look at this very old Egyptian zodiac that has been dug up by archaeologists. It's not exactly looking the very same as what we use now. A few of the sign symbols are different. They're in slightly different order. It shows, again, how old these ideas are and how deep into our history we can go back and find them. All of the high technology I've been talking about today is inherent or implicit in this little stone zodiac. All the math, all the science, all the theology, all the mysticism, and all the ancient sacred technologies are embedded right here in this simple little calendar. And this happened before the time of Christ, long before anything approaching our modern sensibilities. I feel so urgent about sharing this with people because should we ever have enough of a cosmic perturbation to throw our current astrology into disarray, we will need to pull these same assumptions back up out of our cultural memory and reestablish the sexagesimal math so that we can then reestablish the calendar, reestablish our understanding of ourselves in time and space, and set civilization up again. This mystery so tightly folded into this small little circle of glyphs is our cultural seed. It is the thin spindle of necessity upon which our understanding of ourselves as humans, as the technological and calculating creature that we are, is based. So the more we can understand this worldview, including its mathematics and its internal operations, the less we can be baffle-gabbed and mystagogued by magicians, politicians, religious schisms, and every other form of division that we indulge in with our us and them thinking. We are one nation under the sky. We live inside the cosmic clock of our solar system. That will be the same wherever we settle, whether we become an interstellar creature or whether we find ourselves host to species from other solar systems. The sexagesimal math is our common inheritance, shared with every species that lives on a planet circling a sun. So with that, I would like to say thank you for listening, and I look forward to future sharings along these lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, for sharing your life's work and extensive knowledge with us today. We are eagerly looking forward to the rest of your ancient astral alchemy presentation.